welcome today to today's event. It's great to have you here with participants from all corners of the world. Now, I appreciate that some of you have been on this journey with us since 2019, and for others, this might be your very first IFR4NPO event. So we will start with a brief background to the consultation and the project before we dive in to look at who we received responses from. And after a Q&A, we'll then spend the bulk of our time focusing on the feedback from part 1 of the consultation. And then after a Q&A, we will look at the responses to part 2 of the consultation, but this will be at a more overview level since that deeper analysis is still underway. Today's session will be presented by myself. I'm Samantha Msoke, the project director for Humentum, for IFR4NPO Humentum based in Uganda. And I'm delighted to be joined by my colleagues at CIPFA, at the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. That is Karen Sanderson, and also Philip Trotter, who's an associate. Really delighted. Now, having said, we'll start with a brief background and about the project and the consultation process. The project, the IFR4NPO project, exists to develop internationally applicable financial reporting guidance for non-profit organizations. We call them NPOs. And there are 3 stated objectives for the guidance. The first is to improve the quality, transparency, and credibility of NPO financial reports. The second is to support the provision of NPO financial information that's useful for decision-making and accountability, but balancing the needs of preparers and users. And then the third objective is to address NPO-specific issues, and we hope that will promote increased comparability for NPO financial reports. And it's so important for us to have these objectives in mind, as they're really the starting point for everything that we're doing as a project. Which financial reports? Now, because NPOs produce so many different types of financial reports, it's really important to clarify right at the beginning that the guidance that we're developing is for general purpose financial reports. Therefore, an NPO entity as a whole, they're sometimes called the annual audited accounts. That's what this whole project and the focus of today's event is focusing on. In terms of the process, the guidance is being developed in a 3-step process, which is equivalent to all other international accounting standard setters. The output from the consultation phase was the consultation paper, and it's the feedback from this that we'll be presenting today. The next phase will be the development of the guidance for public comment as exposure drafts. And then before we finalize the guidance ready for its planned launch in 2025. So that's an idea of the time frame for the project. In terms of the consultation process itself, we began back in October 2019 when we started drafting the consultation paper with input from our advisory groups. So the practitioner advisory group brings views and perspectives from a wide range of stakeholders, while the technical advisory group, which is drawn from national standard setters, they debate and advise on the project outputs. So the consultation paper was launched in January of last year. Part 1 was closed for comment on the 13th of August and part 2 on the 7th of October. And during that period, we engaged with stakeholders around the world, and everyone was invited to submit their responses. Since August, we've been analysing those responses, formulating the proposed ways forward, and getting input from the advisory groups so that we could bring you this presentation today. Now, overall, about 1,000 people from 96 countries engaged with our events in 4 languages, which we're delighted with. And we received 208 formal written responses from individuals and organizations in 33 countries. Now, the pie chart here shows the regional distribution of respondents for both part 1 and part 2. And you can see it's healthily diverse, shall we say, much as we are continuing to work to improve our outreach to the less engaged parts of the world. Every single response that we received is a matter of public record, and they can all be viewed on the project website at the link shown below, www.ifr4npo.org/cp-response. So if you're interested, you can see them all there. Now, this pie chart here was for the entire consultation paper. Now we're going to narrow in just for part 1, and for the next half an hour or so, we'll be looking at the responses to part 1. So part 1 of the consultation paper focused on landscape level issues. There were 89 respondents, with 67% telling us that they were responding on their own behalf, as individuals sharing their personal opinions. And then 33% of responses were submitted on behalf of organizations. Now, both forms of responses are really important and valid, but looking forward to future consultations, we are hoping to increase the number of responses from individuals, from organizations, to increase the responses from organizations. Now, to that end, we are interested to identify organization champions, we're calling them, who could take a lead in developing responses for their organization to future consultations. These responses would then be submitted formally on behalf of an organization, or perhaps just of a country office if it's a very large international organization. There's an informal description of the role, a link there, which you can follow afterwards. And we can also provide some help and support to organization champions in their role. So if you might be interested to explore that, then please let me know in the chat now, or you can email me later and we can explore that further. Okay, moving on, in terms of respondents to the CP. In terms of the role of the people who responded, they represented a variety of roles in the sector and a variety of stakeholder types. So we can see NPO finance staff and trustees, accountancy bodies and auditors, as well as standard setters, academics, and others. And then the responses by region, specifically for part 1, show a similar trend as what we saw to the consultation as a whole. We had the highest response rates from East and Southern Africa, Europe, West and Central Africa, and Southeast Asia. And we will be working with our project's country champions to improve engagement in the other regions as well. It is so important that we receive input from a wide range of stakeholders and countries so that the guidance development process can consider the full range of priorities and viewpoints and have the best chance of being relevant and useful for all involved. Now, before I hand over to Philip, let's remind ourselves of the different topics and questions that were in the consultation paper. Part 1 was about these landscape level concerns. The links there shown on the slide take you to the consultation paper itself. And there's also a popular set of pages with videos on each of the accounting issues. So we're going to be looking at how do we decide whether an entity is an NPO? Who are NPOs? Who are the stakeholders that use NPO financial reports? What are their information needs? What are the issues relating to accrual basis guidance? When considering non-financial narrative reporting aspects, how prescriptive should the guidance be? What were your views on using existing international accounting frameworks as a starting point? And finally, we'll share your feedback on the bespoke development model that we proposed using IFRS for SME as a base. Now, for each of these, we'll look briefly at what we proposed in the consultation paper and the question that we asked, followed by a summary of what respondents said and what we're going to do in general terms.